Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating and honestly highly controversial moment in internet history. And, because we're tackling some pretty heavy ethical concepts, like what happens when massive tech platforms treat our daily social lives like an unregulated laboratory, we thought, why not process it with a slightly kawaii anime-inspired twist? Sometimes a little pastel coloring helps the dystopian reality go down easier, right? Let's get right into it.
So let's start with a really provocative question. Picture this. You're casually scrolling through Facebook back in January 2012. Could the platform have secretly manipulated your mood? Like, could it literally force you to feel sad without you having the slightest clue it was happening? It sounds exactly like the plot of some sci-fi anime, but this actually happened in real life.
The reality? Exactly 689,003 Facebook users were part of a massive psychological experiment. That's almost 700,000 people. And the real kicker here is that absolutely zero of them knew they were participating at the time. They were just silently opted in, becoming test subjects in this vast digital petri dish. Right, so here's the timeline of how this whole thing unfolded. Facebook ran this secret test for 1 week in January 2012, but the rest of the world? We had no idea until 2014. That's when Facebook, along with some Cornell University researchers, published the results in a major scientific journal called PNS. And men, the absolute second that paper hit the internet, immediate massive public outrage. Okay, to understand why everyone was so incredibly mad, we kind of need to understand what the researchers were actually looking for. The goal was to test something called emotional contagion. Basically, it's this psychological phenomenon where people's emotions are reinforced by what they see, causing moods to effectively infect and spread throughout a network. They wanted to know, if your friends post sad things, do you catch that sadness and post sad things too?
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is how they tested this. For a full week, Facebook intentionally messed with its news feed algorithm. For one group, they deliberately hid a small percentage of posts that had positive emotional words. For another group, they hid posts with negative words. Then they just stepped back and analyzed over 3 million subsequent status updates to see how those users' behaviors changed. They literally curated reality just to see how humans would react.
So, what did they actually find? Well, The Guardian summed it up perfectly. The results showed that users' emotions actually were reinforced by what they saw. It really worked. Users who were fed fewer positive posts literally began using fewer positive words in their own updates, and vice versa. They proved, without a doubt, that emotions can absolutely be contagious purely through a screen. No face-to-face interaction required. To really get why this is such a huge deal, we have to look at how this fits into user research. Usually you have generative, descriptive, evaluative, and causal research. Facebook's experiment falls firmly under causal. Basically, they were running large-scale A/B testing, showing version A to one group and version B to another, specifically to answer why and how human emotions fluctuate based on what an algorithm feeds them. But here is where the massive controversy really kicks into high gear. We basically have two totally different worlds colliding here. On one side, you have the strict, historically hard-won ethical rules of academic research. On the other side, the move fast and break things, highly secretive reality of corporate data mining. This experiment straddled both, and critics argue it basically violated the rules of academia while hiding behind the shield of corporate secrecy. Let's look at what legal experts had to say about all this. Practically the second the study dropped, legal scholars like James Grimmelman over at the University of Maryland published some really extensive critiques. He pointed out severe ethical problems with how this specific study completely bypassed traditional, vital academic safeguards that are quite literally designed to protect human beings. To really grasp Grimmelman's argument, we need to quickly talk about the common rule. In traditional academia in the US, researchers have to follow this federal framework. It guarantees human subjects are protected, largely by making absolutely sure they give explicit informed consent and by requiring an institutional review board, an IRB, to approve the whole experiment before it ever even starts. But, as Grimmelman so bluntly points out, Facebook completely sidestepped this whole process. They didn't ask users if they wanted to be part of a psychological experiment. Nobody got a pop-up saying, hey, we'd like to test if we can alter your mood today, click yes to proceed. Nothing like that at all.
Instead of getting actual ethical permission, the researchers relied on this massive legal loophole. Because the academic researchers at Cornell were technically only analyzing data that Facebook had already collected through its corporate operations, the Cornell IRB told them they didn't need traditional ethical review. Grimmelman heavily criticizes this as IRB laundering. Basically, he argues it outsources the ethical burden of human manipulation to an unregulated private company just to dodge academic oversight.
And this perfectly illustrates the core legal argument against Facebook's defense. Facebook's defenders were like, hey, our algorithm filters your newsfeed all the time anyway, this is no different. But Grimmelman argues, look, a surgeon might routinely make incisions, sure, but that doesn't mean you've consented to some unproven secret experimental procedure. This deliberate algorithmic manipulation was imposed purely for research, and that totally crossed a major ethical line.
Oh, and when the general public realized what had happened, the backlash was immediate, and it was intense. Users felt fundamentally betrayed. People were saying they felt like lab rats stuck in some giant corporate maze. The sheer lack of transparency caused so much outrage that U.S. Senator Mark Warner actually publicly called for the Federal Trade Commission to step in and investigate.
But, the criticism wasn't just about the lack of an opt-out button. Ethicists Evan Selinger and Woodrow Hartzog published a paper arguing the problem went so much deeper than just temporary mood manipulation. They identified a really fascinating concept they called co-opted identity.
Selinger and Hartzog argued that Facebook violated the contextual integrity of users' lives, and honestly, it's a massive breach of trust. Just think about it. If you post a vulnerable update about having a bad day, you expect your friends to see it and support you, right? You absolutely do not expect a giant corporation to secretly weaponize your authentic sadness, repurposing it as an experimental stimulus to see if they can infect your family and friends with your bad mood.
So let's zoom out to the broader perspective of media studies for a second. Scholars everywhere started debating the true nature of this whole event. Was this just harmless, routine algorithmic tweaking? The kind of A/B testing companies do every single day to see if you prefer a blue button over a red one? Or was this an insidious, covert form of mass manipulation, essentially treating almost 700,000 people as a programmable resource?
Now, in defense of the experiment, lead researcher Adam Kramer did take to Facebook to apologize for the anxiety the study caused. But he also pointed out a really crucial detail. The actual measurable behavioral impact was incredibly tiny. We're talking about affected users producing an average of just one fewer emotional word per 1,000 words written. It's barely a drop in the bucket.
And that right there brings us to a massive ethical divide, which is kind of the core tension of this whole explainer. Does the really small statistical impact of the experiment, the fact that people were technically barely harmed, excuse the fact that hundreds of thousands of people were manipulated without their knowledge? I mean, if someone secretly conducts an experiment on you in your sleep, but you don't wake up with a headache, is it still a violation?
Because of this massive gray area, legal and privacy experts argue we absolutely cannot rely on tech companies to just police themselves. They argue that regulatory bodies, like the FTC, are perfectly positioned to step in and demand comprehensive research oversight. The ultimate goal here? Preventing a future where corporate giants treat their user base as a massive, completely unregulated petri dish.
To be fair, in response to the global firestorm, Facebook did take action. Their chief technology officer issued a public apology. They rolled out a brand new internal framework for research, promised much stricter guidelines, added comprehensive privacy training for engineers, and created an extensive internal review stage for any research involving deeply personal content like emotions.
But as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves a final, lingering question. Even with all those internal review boards, can true privacy, or truly informed consent, ever actually exist on a platform that is fundamentally built and monetized to constantly observe, A/B test, and alter our behavior? It is definitely something to think about the next time you casually scroll through your feed. Thanks for learning with us today.